Hey friends, today I'll be reading A Chance Encounter. The story was inspired by two people, a couple that are featured in my book, Whispers Over Wild Rose Road. But this book doesn't take place until they're in their 50s. And this story is when they are in their 20s and they have a chance encounter. And that's why it's called A Chance Encounter. At the time, they are both married to other people. And it was also kind of a poke at myself and others who still sometimes want to be a part of the in crowd. Do you know those people? They're name droppers. They just never got over that high school mentality of wanting to be with the hip and the savvy. And I hate it when I see that in myself, and sometimes I do. And it's disturbing when I see it in friends and family of people that I love, even though I know that it's probably biologically instinctual, right? Because when we were all hanging out around a campfire, we wanted to be with the bravest and the strongest hunter so we could eat, or we weren't eaten, and hanging out with the sick and the infirm was just dangerous. And so I think it's a natural thing to want to be with the cool people, and but still sometimes it's easy to poke fun at them and at myself, because I'm sure I do it too, even though I'd rather not. So anyway, this is a short story about Lizzie and Ashton. And so thanks for joining me. 1995, Calico, California. The shrill ring made Lizzie jump. Chad had given their cell phone for Mother's Day. She was still getting used to it. Wasn't sure she liked it. BC, before cell phones. She could disappear if she wanted to. No one could reach her. No one knew where she might be hiding now that invisibility factor had been ripped away. The phone rang again. Lizzie glanced away from the undulating highway to see who called. Maisie. She answered, but only static replied. Lizzie let the phone drop to her lap, wondering what her sister wanted to talk about, but not curious enough to pursue the conversation, because, after all, calls cost money. A dental practice also cost money, a lot of money. Lizzie followed the marker pointing to the parking lot of the ghost town. The sun glinted off the shiny cars. Heat like a wavy vapor visibly rose from the baking asphalt. She parked between a Jeep and a dusty Toyota Corolla, tucked the cell phone and keys into her bag, pulled on a wide-brimmed straw hat, and opened the door. The air felt like a furnace blast. Welcome to Calico, California. Lizzie followed a path winding through a collection of wooden structures. How many, if any, were original? She passed a saloon, a church, a post office, and a school. A few of the people milling about were dressed in 19th century costumes. The tinkling of a piano sounded through an open window. A man dressed in Levi jeans, held up with a belt with a palm-sized silver buckle and a 10-gallon hat and tooled leather cowboy boots, stood on a porch. His voice boomed over the small crowd. Lizzie took her place in the back, beside a man hiding behind a camcorder and a woman with her hands resting on the hands of the stroller. A golden-haired baby curled up at Lizzie and waved a tiny stuffed giraffe at her. Lizzie smiled at the baby and her heart tugged. Her own Ella was probably about this girl's age. The man in the cowboy hat and boots tucked his thumbs into his gun harness and addressed the crowd. This is a dangerous place filled with brave men and the women who love them. The trek here was long and arduous. Many died on the trail. Few survived once they arrived. Lured by the prospect of easy riches, they came, despite the fact the desert only promises heat and dust. Lexi elbowed Ashton, jostling the camera. That's Sarah Sarandon, she hissed. Ashton blew out a breath and tapped down his frustration. The museum docent wasn't really all that interesting anyway. He lowered the camcorder to search for the Sarah Sarandon look-alike. "That woman with the gold sandals, that's her," Lexi whispered and nodded at a tall, statuesque woman wearing a baseball cap, dark sunglasses, and a pair of strappy gold heels. "I heard she's filming a film around here," Lexi continued in a hushed tone. "Those shoes are to die for. I wonder where she got them." The woman in said shoes turned to leave. "I'm going to follow her." Lexi strode after her, abandoning the stroller. Adele tossed her giraffe after her mother. Ashton stooped to pick it up and bonked his head. Straightening, he rubbed his new sore spot and gazed at the pretty blonde holding Adele's giraffe. "Sorry," she said, and she weaved on her feet. "No, I'm sorry." He reached out to steady her. She gave him a watery smile and held out the giraffe like a peace offering. "Are you okay?" He took the giraffe and dropped it back into Adele's clutches. Adele babbled her appreciation. The woman brushed her pale hair off her forehead with the back of her hand. "Just not super adapted to the heat." "Tell me about it. It's like a furnace here. I take it you're not a local?" "No." She glanced around. "I think the only locals here are rattlesnakes and lizards." And then, as if struck by a sudden idea, she bolted. Strange. Ashton watched the woman who had hit him on the head scurry through the people milling about the old wooden structures, wondering who she was and why she was in such a hurry to get away. Lizzie found the restrooms nearly in time. The cinder block building felt blessedly cool. Because both the stalls were occupied, she braced her hands on the trash can, leaned over, and waited for her stomach to settle. She took 3 deep breaths through her nose, inhaling the scents of a used diaper mixed with somebody's discarded French fries. Her belly roiled. She dry heaved over the can. Then someone distracted her. A brunette poked her head over one stall to peer into the neighboring stall. A toilet flushed and a woman in a baseball cap scuttled out. Then a lot of things seemed to happen all at once. Something crashed to the floor, a woman screamed, water gushed from the stall belonging to the creeper. Bracing herself against the wall, Lizzie watched as a tide of water seemed to carry the woman she'd seen earlier with the man in the camcorder out into the center of the room. The woman righted herself to a kneeling position and pushed to her feet. She was drenched from the waist down, but it didn't slow her. The woman bolted from the restroom. The water swirled past Lizzie, heading out the door, carrying something sleek and shiny in its tide. Lizzie wasn't willing to wade into the water, although it was probably clean enough, to rescue what she now recognized as one of those new fancy flip phones. The phone drifted in the flow and settled near the trash can. Lizzie rescued it, took a deep breath, and went to get a paper towel to dry it off. She had to choose where she stepped so as not to soak her shoes. Would the phone be ruined? Lizzie glanced in the stall and noticed the toilet had come completely off the wall and was now lying on the floor like a wounded animal. With the phone in her hand, Lizzie went outside to find someone who could salvage the restroom or at least shut the water off, and also the woman who had dropped her phone. Lexi, sopping wet, appeared at Ashton's side. "We have to go, now." Her words escaped in short huffs of breath. "What happened to you?" Had she tried to cool off by soaking her clothes? That didn't seem like a very Lexi thing to do. Lexi refused to meet his gaze and poked him with her outstretched hand. "Give me the keys. I'll meet you in the car." Adele laughed as if she found her mom being drenched hilarious. Lexi flashed her daughter a frustrated glance. "Give me the keys." Ashton had hoped for some better footage. He understood the value of history and the importance of keeping it alive. But he also knew that Calico, for Lexi, had only been a pit stop, and not a very interesting one, between Las Vegas and Palm Desert. Ashton also knew, better than to argue with his wife. They'd been married for nearly 10 years, and keeping Adele had been the only argument he'd ever won. Adele could use a nap. Heck, he could use a nap. Plus, Lexi needed a change of clothes. And while Palm Desert was full of glitzy condos and pools, nearby Palm Springs had its own fair share of history. Resigned, Ashton tucked his camcorder away and rolled the stroller after his wife. On their way to the parking lot, they passed the restrooms and several people carrying mops and buckets. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Ashton asked Lexi's wet backside. Lexi answered with a hostile glance that she threw over her shoulder. Back at the hotel, Lindsay wiggled into her pants but left the top button undone. Her loose and airy peasant top helped keep her secret. When Chad emerged from the shower, clad in a towel wrapped around his waist, she couldn't help feeling twinges of jealousy. He looked just the same as he had when they'd married 6 years ago, whereas she was bursting out of her bra and couldn't button her pants. "How was golf?" she asked. Chad launched into a drive-by-putt-by-hole description of the round, but Lizzie got lost in the birdies and pars and started thinking about the couple she had met in Calico. Chad fell silent and she realized he had asked her a question. He repeated it. "How was the pool?" "Oh, I didn't go." "What? Why not?" "I went to Calico. It's a ghost town." "You would rather go to a ghost town than hang with my mom and Madeline?" "I thought I had enough of the sun yesterday." His disapproving frown melted and he came over to drop a kiss on the top of her head. "That's fair." He toweled his hair. "Did you check on Ella?" Lizzie held up her feet and examined her purple toes. "I talked to Midge. They're having a good time. They went to the zoo today." "Ella is probably lost in the thick of all those kids." "Midge only has 2 more than us." No point in telling him that Midge nursed a secret ambition of having 6 children. 6 kids for Chad would be tantamount to wanting to have 5 cats. And he wouldn't understand. But Lizzie did. Of course, she wouldn't try to convince him to have more. Chad stepped into his pants, pulled on his shirt, and stood before the mirror to comb his hair. "You about ready to go?" He flashed her a quick glance in the mirror. "You look nice." "Thanks." Could he really mean that? What would he say if he caught a glimpse of her top button? She smoothed down her top and climbed to her feet. "Where are we going to dinner?" He headed toward the door. "Some fancy joint Madeline picked out. It's just around the corner." His expression brightened. "Jim Monroe called earlier. He wants to know if we're ready to sign the contract." Lizzie's breath hitched. "What did you say?" "That I need to have my lawyer look over it." Chad held the door and waited for Lizzie to pass through. After taking her hand, Chad and Lizzie joined the crowd surging the sidewalk. The sun, now a pink smudge on the horizon, had lost its power, and a cool breeze ruffled the hem of Lizzie's blouse. She pressed one hand against her belly. "Would it be so bad if you continued working for your dad?" "We'd have to stay in Rancho Alegro." He skated her a glance. "I thought you wanted to move someplace rural. That's why Lester's practice is so perfect." She wrinkled her nose. "And expensive." "Don't forget, it's expensive to live anywhere in Orange County." Lizzie gasped when a familiar couple pushing a baby stroller rounded the corner. "There's that couple I met in Calico." She dropped Chad's hand, reached into her bag for the phone she'd found in the restroom, and weaved through the crowd to catch up with them. "Hey!" She held up the phone for evidence. "I found your phone." A woman who looked surprisingly like Susan Sarandon turned around, as did the woman who had dropped her phone. "That's not mine," the woman said without even looking at it. "Are you sure?" Lizzie studied first the woman with a hostile expression, and then her husband, the man she'd seen with a camcorder, and then their child, who smiled and waved the toy giraffe at Lizzie. "Positive," the woman snarled, turned her back, and strode away. "But I saw you today at Calico," Lizzie called after them. "You dropped your phone in the restroom. I looked, but I couldn't find you." Chad caught up to her. "What's that about?" Confused, Lizzie slipped the phone back into her bag. "It was the weirdest thing. I know I saw them earlier. And was that Susan Sarandon with them?" "I don't know." Chad stared in the direction. "She looks different when she's not fighting big spiders." Lizzie elbowed him and he grunted as if she'd injured him. "That Signori Weaver, you oaf." She told him about the woman standing on the toilet to spy on the Susan Sarandon look-alike in the next stall, and how the toilet had broken and all the docents got their 19th century costume soaked when they tried to stem the toilet tide. By the time they reached the restaurant, she had Chad doubled over in laughter. The other members of Chad's family joined them on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. "What's so funny?" Madeline, her stuffy sister-in-law, wanted to know. So Chad told them, but it wasn't as funny when he repeated it. Someone touched Lizzie's elbow. She turned to see the man she'd seen earlier, only he no longer had the baby stroller or the camcorder. He cast a nervous glance at the Clarks. They were a tall, handsome, and intimidating group, and Lizzie felt a flash of compassion for him and remorse for poking fun at his wife. "Can I see that phone?" he asked in a hushed tone. A server stuck her head out of the restaurant doors. "Clark, party of 6? Chad shot her a questioning glance. Lizzie held up her finger. "I'll be right there." After waiting a beat for the Clarks to file inside, she stepped out of the crowd and pulled the phone from her bag. The man took it and met her gaze with his big brown, earnest eyes. He ran his thumb over the case. "This belongs to my wife. Thanks for finding it, and us." "I knew it was you. Why would your wife lie?" He shrugged. "She was embarrassed, maybe afraid to let me down, or maybe she was afraid someone would try to make her pay for whatever happened in the restroom." He paused. "What did happen?" She told him about the broken toilet, but didn't mention she had seen his wife standing on it to spy on the person in the next stall. It no longer seemed funny. His lips twitched, but he also looked sad. Lizzie decided to change the subject. "Is that Susan Sarandon with you guys?" "No. She's a hedge fund manager with Goldman Sachs, which is, in Lexi's opinion, even better. My wife collects the wealthy the way my grandma collects teacups." He sucked in a deep breath as if he wanted to recapture his words. Holding up the phone, he waved at her and turned to go. "Thanks for this." She felt reluctant to let him leave. "Does your wife know you're talking to me?" He walked backwards, still facing her, but moving away. "No, but I'll tell her. She might not believe me, but honesty is the best policy, and hiding the truth is the same as telling a lie." He pocketed the phone and said goodbye. His words teased Lizzie throughout dinner. As soon as she and Chad were back in the hotel room and alone, she blurted out, "I'm pregnant." Chad, who had stripped out of his clothes, dropped his shirt. "You're what?" Had he really not heard? "Pregnant. We're going to have another baby." He held out his arms. "Sweetie, that's great." She stepped into his embrace and placed her head on his chest. "You're not mad?" Listening to the steady thrumming of his heart, she felt immediately comforted. "Mad?" he echoed, rocked her side to side and stroked her hair. "How can I be mad? We won't be able to afford the practice, especially not if this pregnancy costs as much as the last." "It won't, but so what if it does? We'll make it work." She craned her neck to look up at him, and he placed a kiss on her lips. "You'll have to continue working for your dad." "I like my dad." "We'll have to stay in Rancho Alegro." "As long as I'm with you and Ella, I don't care where we live." He took her hand, placed one hand on her waist, and waltzed her around the room until she felt breathless and giddy. "Want to know a secret?" He smothered a smile. "I've known for weeks." She danced away to swat at him. "You knew?" He recaptured her, swung her in his arms, and plopped down on the bed and settled her onto his lap. "Sweetie, watching you in the shower is my favorite pastime. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? And you really don't mind holding off on starting your own practice?" He placed his finger under her chin and lifted her face so he could look in her eyes. "With you and Ella and this new baby, Clark, I'm practicing every day, and it's the best sort of practice there is." Lizzie closed her eyes and thought of the chance encounter with the man. His words had helped her create one of the best nights of her life. She wanted to thank him somehow, but she suspected she'd never see him again. Time would prove her wrong. So, do you want to read more about Lizzie and Ashton? Their romance begins nearly 30 years later in Whispers Over Wild Rose Road. And it's available on Amazon for only 99 cents. Thanks for coming. If you enjoy my free stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button. Have a good day.